Thank you all for coming to our Adventures of Books program. My name is Stephanie. I'm one of the Information Services librarians here. That's Catherine. She's the director of our special collections. And this is Ann Reid. She is from the Karpeles Manuscript Library Museum. I've been there, highly recommend that you go. We have a lot of really interesting and fun exhibits and programs that they do. She is the mini museum program coordinator. And we have some examples of the mini museums that we have in the back.
I have also been a school teacher. I've worked as a librarian in history genealogy library. I've been children's programmer. Ironically, when I was a kid and a young person, I was a horrible reader. It was much more fun to roller skate and ride a bike and be outside. When I got to college, I had an English professor my freshman year who got me interested in reading for pleasure. I had to do a lot of research. So I spent a lot of time in the library and I found out I love to research. But I've never written a book, but I have helped other people write a book. And how do you know if you want to be a writer? One of my friends, this book is over here, when somebody asked her that at a talk, she said, if you get up every morning and the first thing you want to do is write something, then you're a writer. And so if you know you want to be a writer, how do you get started writing? Well, yeah, pick your subject, your passion, your reason for writing. There's lots of different reasons, but basically you get an idea and you say, I think I want to turn this into a book. And we've all read books. It's taken us on all kinds of adventures and stuff. But I realized in helping people publish books and get them written is another whole adventure. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. First of all, if you are interested and you decide to write a book, don't expect it to happen overnight. It takes a while. Sometimes, in fact, one of the authors over here came to visit me at a historic site and said, I'm going to write a book on Patrick Henry. I said, oh, wonderful. I'll be glad to help you. He said, I just wrote 7 doing Patrick Henry. Can you help me? And then just taking the time to do it. You've got an idea. Most of the ones I've worked with have suggested getting an outline. Kind of put your thoughts together and then get ready to write. You also have to kind of decide on what point of view you're going to do, whether you're going to put your characters in the book, how they're going to communicate the whole story. You have to decide your style. One of them has very interesting, and she described between Harry Potter and it meets history. Historic, it's very detailed, she's got magic in it. The next one I would highly recommend is to know what a story arc is, so that you can tell a nice story. If you don't know what it is, you set the stage, you tell the thing, and then you conclude it. That's your story arc. If you're going to do fiction, novels, nonfiction, if it's nonfiction, count on a lot of research. Just decide whether it's going to be a short story, whatever you want to write, then you get started. The other things that you might really want to consider is have somebody with extra eyes, somebody that you can trust and hand over your stuff, who knows enough about reading and writing that can look at it and say, oh, wow, that's not right. And if you have somebody, especially historic things or things that need to be factual, have a fact checker with you. It just helps you not write a whole book and then somebody goes, oh, that's all wrong. So go it as you go. Illustrators, if you're going to put pictures in it, you might start looking for an illustrator. I have a brother-in-law that wrote a book. I don't know how many years ago. And he's never published it, never did anything because he couldn't find somebody to. I suggested to my sister, who was his wife, do her photography for him and illustrate. So kind of look beyond it. Sometimes where you don't get. Then get a publisher. They're very good at helping you make sure about copyrights for yourself and that you aren't borrowing somebody else's work as well. And then you decide where you're going to write and set up your writing station. Some people have a little desk, some people have a legal pad, wherever. Where did you say you write on your
I
computer?
would grab ramen noodles, get a glass of water, and write on my dining room table.
She's going to be a writer here. Well, she is a writer. And then once you get your book all together and you publish it, then you have more. Next thing you know, the publisher is going to say, signing. And then if you have a movie theater that comes over, or movie, turn your novel into a book. And let me tell you, adventure. So there's a lot of different things. Some of the movies that I've helped with, let's Turn, if you haven't seen that, that was based on the book by Alexander Rose, Washington Spies. It was an AMC movie. Awesome. Another one that has been running that some people have seen, like Outlander, based on books. Lord of the Rings, which we have the mini museum back there for. It was actually supposed to be one book. And it turned out to be so big, they said, we better make this 3 or nobody's going to be able to carry it. So they made it into 3. So let me tell you a little bit about my experience in helping with writers. It started basically with this gentleman right here. This was his only book. He had relatives that came here as Hessian soldiers for the Revolutionary War. The person that's in this book, it was basically sold out of Germany to come work, and that way he raised money for his family. He wrote this book because he wanted his mother to see it before she died. She was very ill. The book is about a blacksmith. And believe it or not, the person that wrote this is a fine metal smith. And that's how I met him, was I went in to get a piece of jewelry fixed. And we started talking about books. Not a problem for me. So it's very quick. It was, just thrown together basically to make sure that it was done before his mother died. And he did. So this is his first annulling. I didn't have anything to do with it, but this is one of the first authors I met with a book in his hand. So it's all right. I like this. Is a love Civil War. She wrote 4 books. They all have a Civil War mystery. She loved writing, but here's one of those other little twists. When she started doing book signings and book talks, she didn't like it so much. She was just not that kind of person to get up and go, oh yeah, I just love it, and sit there and chat with everybody. And then this was her first book, and she put this picture on it. So then they started asking her to dress up like this to go to book signings. And she said, no way. I said, I'll dress up. No, they want me to do it. So she pretty much stopped writing. Or she wrote, she never really put it out there again because she didn't want to go through that. But this is the book I helped her write. I just helped her do some research. And I was working at the History Genealogy Library at the time and just helped her do it. So she acknowledged me and the library. And when she got it ready, she sent me this. This is what the book looked like before it looked like this. It's just pages. Because once you start handing out your book to other people, you to lose things. I have it when it was in this form. It got its name changed for this form. I knew her, believe it or not, girls that were scouts. This lady wrote 3 books. This is based on history. Her family were part of the ladies that came to Jamestown. If y'all aren't familiar with Jamestown, it's in Virginia, first permanent colony in the cup. And she wrote 1 book, and I was reading it and loved it. Then one day I'm working at work, because I worked in a historic house museum, and she shows up at the door for a tour. And she starts to introduce herself. I said, I know who you are. And she goes, oh, and we go downstairs, and in the basement, here are these looms and big spinning wheels and everything. And she goes, oh, I wish I knew how to do all this. I said, I can tell you. So we sat on steps outside for a couple hours, and I explained the whole process of taking flax, which is a plant, to the process of making a shirt with it. That's what she put in here in terms of the ladies that were working at Jamestown. So see, I helped, but I didn't do the writing. But she did the 3rd book. And shortly after she finished the books, they were doing archaeological digs at Jamestown. And they started uncovering the basement of a house that was her family's. So yeah, it was really neat to see this and read it and then go, oh my gosh, and then go see the archaeological dig. I also worked for the company that was doing the archaeological dig. So as my grandson says, you've done a lot now. Yeah, I have. This one I just discovered last week. I went home to visit. My mother for years said she had an original manuscript of a book that her mother gave away to her sister, and her sister never gave it back. Well, this is what actually happened. And the reason this gentleman, who is a relative of mine, a distant relative, he was a Methodist Episcopal preacher, and he was born in 1831. And his reason for writing it was that he wanted to share some of his experiences so that it might help other people. He was also very poor. They did not pay their ministers very well back then. It was pre-Civil War, Civil War time. So he said, maybe I'll earn some coins as well for my pocket if I sell this book. So, but it also is helping me do research for this gentleman's next book. This one is the one that I met 15 years ago now. But she came to Scotchtown, which was the home of Patrick Henry in Hanover County. And she said, I want to write a book about Patrick Henry. I said, love to help you. Well, 10 years later, she shows up again. She goes, I'm ready to write the book. She decided to write more of the beginning history from time to this, and had written 7 other books by the time she got back to this. This started out as 1 book. It is now 3 books and maybe 5 by the time she gets finished. But this is the one that writes beautifully history accurately. But she likes to do it for a younger reader. So she has the epic order of 7. And these are magical creatures. There's a Scotty named Max and a cat named Liz, who's French. Scotty is Scottish, of course. Al is Irish. He's an orange cat. There's also a little white terrier, West Highlander terrier named Kate. And then there are 2 creatures that are a goat and a sheep, and they can transform to anything. All of them time travel. So she uses them to explain things, like they mentioned Mozart and maybe something about his music. Well, one of them goes, oh yeah, I remember when I went to visit this, and they tell all about him doing whatever. She also very much believes in writing where things happen. She says, if you don't sit in the seat that Mozart sat in, if you don't sit in the church where Patrick Henry gave the speech, if you don't sit in the basement of his house when his wife died, how can you write the scenes? So talk about adventures. She goes everywhere to sit in these places. And some of them you go, how on earth? She goes, if you don't ask, you don't get. So she's done things that a lot of us probably would never have done just because she walks up to him and says, I need to sit in Mozart's chair. Can I sit here? I just need to be here for a few minutes. And she will get in there. Another colleague and I went to the museum the Historic Museum in Richmond, Virginia, and we wanted to look at Patrick Henry items. They have his glasses. We two looked at them in the box. There was a pad on the table, there was padding on the floor, and neither one of us picked them up. Ginny went in, she picked them up and tried them on. She says, well, I want to see what they look like. I wanted to see how bad his vision was. She didn't break them either. But this is the kind of person she is. And where this one hated to be at a book signing, dressed up it like this one will dress up, she will talk to everybody, she'll take pictures with 100 people, and she'll do it in period clothes if you want her to. She loves to be center stage. So it just shows that there are many different kinds of writers, and many do the other things that need to get done. When you write a book, get it published, it takes a while to find that match. This gentleman I met one day at St. John's. I was trained to do tours. I was also trained to be in the gift shop. He had the idea to write this as a short story. And he was going around to historic sites trying to get some information about the 18th century. He did the tour, then he came back to the gift shop. And he goes, recommend a good book for me. I said, well, how much information do you want? I knew all the books, I'd read them, it even helped a couple of people do a little research for them. So I told him all about it. And then I showed him this one and I said, oh, I helped her write this one. I helped her fact checking and, reading it for content and everything. And he goes, oh, I think I want to be a writer. He says, I've done a couple of short stories. I said, oh, really? I said, what are they about? He goes, squirrels and bird feeders. I kind of laughed at him. I said, anybody who's had a bird feeder has a squirrel and a bird feeder story. He says, but have they ever looked at it from the squirrel's perspective? And I'm going, no. I said, that would be interesting to read. So chatting a little bit more, he took my name, number, and sent me a copy of the book, of the short story. Very good. Then he sent me another one. It was awesome. It was about a true life experience he'd had, and it was a great story, and he'd written it really well, except he knew nothing about a story arc. He gave the whole thing away in the first paragraph. I couldn't wait to call him. I said, guess what? This is so totally awesome, but you need to learn about story arc. He gave away everything in the first paragraph. You gotta build it and then go. So he said, okay, if you're so smart, I'm going to write a book now. I'm going to write another short story. So we met for 3 hours in a restaurant close to St. John's, and he had the outline for this book. I did not find out until here that it was supposed to be just a short story. Well, this is about a family member who was involved in the Revolutionary War. And though Boston got the credit for the big tea party, a lot of other places had it too. And a ship called the Peggy Stewart was burned because it had tea on it. And this is where his family had been part of the Revolutionary War. So I knew everything about 18th century living, clothes, food, everything, and we were chatting. And so he started writing, and then he sent me chapters, and it'd be written and read. And need a menu for right here. And so we just kept going. He wrote once that the girl was wearing a white blouse, blue skirt, red cape, and an apron with a pocket. And I was going, no, she wasn't. Here. And we met another time for 3 hours. I showed him fabric. I showed him clothes, design, how they put clothes on, how the pockets were. And that's my contribution. Plus, I kept him going. When he didn't think he really wanted to go much further, I said, oh, you're doing so great. Keep doing the chapters, because he has an excellent way of leaving you at the end of the chapter that you're going, I gotta turn the page. Except I'm getting it chapter by chapter now. So, but this was this book at one time by the chapters, where I was reading, editing, making a few notes. And then this is what he sent when it was all done. And this, by the way, is double-sided pages for the last few readings. And after several other people have read it, it got more editing. This is how Jenny sent her final book, when we were actually working on it. We had both had notebooks about like this. But this is just a reader's copy, and she expected it. And this is the Epic Order of 7.
Cool.
It is cool. Even another thing that she does, well, she signs books and says, thanks a lot. But because Max, which is this dog right here, and Liz, which is this cat, were her first inspiration for writing her series of books, if she signs your book in person, you also get Max's and Liz's signature. And they are the paw prints. She had stamps made of their paw prints. Max has passed away. Now she has another one that looks just like Max, but it's Jock. So there's all kinds of neat things. Talking about illustrations, I saw this when it was just a make-believe thing. It had most of it here. This character right here was just an outline. She decided to make him Washington. And so we put a uniform on. Had a beautiful blue sky out the window. Somebody that both of us consider an expert beyond expert on Patrick Henry said, no, the day he gave his Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech, it was raining. So she went back and had him change to a cloudy day. So there's all kinds of things you have to consider, a lot of things to do. And it just, to do this book, it took us 2.5 years. It just went on the market April. So it takes the time. And talk about copyrights. He had picked a picture, pulled it off the internet, copyrighted, had to change it. He puts the little ships in here for the markers. Found out that was copyrighted by somebody else too. So he had to go back and change all of it. So.
There's another book that had a ship like that. It's like called Sea something. I had read it for school.
Oh, okay. So any questions?
Is the thing that you showed us that is under civil blight, is that what you call a galley proof or not? All the pages underneath civil blood.
Oh, that's what she sent from she printed it off. Oh, and it's just it's just the book that's been printed for me to read, proofread.
Well, I've heard of, galleys, and so that's why I wondered if that was what you officially called a galley proof.
I don't know, but yeah.
Who published the Civil War mysteries?
Are we getting there? Viking.
Did she have a hard time finding a publisher?
I don't know. I didn't get to work with her that close. We were friends. We did it. I didn't even know she was a writer until we got to this. And this is like the third book I think she wrote. But when we did, and she started doing book signings and stuff, she was telling me about this because she knew I did period clothes and stuff. Yeah.
Is it hard to get an idea accepted by a publisher? Because, not everybody gets their book published. Do they reject quite a bit if it's, I guess what's the rarity of actually getting a book published?
Well, the gentleman that I helped, he looked around for a while and found somebody. I don't know how many rejections he got. Jenny has been doing one for years, so she's, so once you get them, they kind of stick with you. In fact, that's what he was worried about with the second book. He goes, do I have to do this all over again? She goes, no, you're stuck with me now. So,
Jill, I don't know if you know Jill Esbaum, but she lives on a farm near Dixon. And she had her first manuscript accepted in 2000. She had taken a class in children's writing, and they told her, they told the students that you had as much chance of getting your children's book published as you did of getting struck by lightning. So it is very difficult. It does happen, yes. And we have had local people, but I think you almost, like, she went to a writer's conference. And so there, you could pay to meet with an editor. And so, and then Liz and Lucy LaRue in Moline went to a conference and they took their manuscript. So it helps a lot if you go in person and meet somebody rather than just submitting it.
Okay.
So there is hope, but be prepared for a lot of rejection.
Right.
and there are ways to self-publish where you can just send it and they publish it and bind it up for you and stuff. One of my son's high school friends did that, but she just wanted to prove to herself that she could write a book. She didn't care that much about sending it out in the world, but it was good. And I have a copy of that too. But she almost passed out when I told her I read it. I said, it was good. So.
Annie, do you have any questions about the process or
Um,
anything?
no,
Since
not
you
really.
enjoyed writing?
Besides, if you self-publish it, how do you quite do that with your printer and computer?
Well, you can send it to somebody that will publish it for you, kind of thing. Look online. That's how she found. There's several people. I was trying to think of the company because for a long time I was getting notes from them.
There's Author House. A friend of mine went through Author House.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ones.
Yeah, and there's local places, the Midwest Writing Center. You could get like help from them and they do a lot of stuff and they also publish things too. So I don't know if they have like a young writers like or group or whatever, but they might have competitions. So you might even be able to get like published in an anthology, like if you write a short story or poem.
What was the name of the group?
Midwest Writers Center.
It's through the Rock Island Public Library.
Okay.
Yeah, they
It's in that library.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're open Monday through Friday, noon to 6.
Yeah.
And they're down in the basement at the Rock Island Public Library.
Yeah, a lot of, there's a gentleman, he does primarily short stories and poetry. And he gets a lot of his stuff published in anthologies. He's written a couple books. I can't remember if he's like kind of self-published them or not, but he puts them on Amazon and sells them.
Yeah.
So, and he's always submitting stuff for like competitions and stuff. So that's another way to like, because if you're passionate about something, you can have like side projects where you can do that passion project. But if you want to just like hone your skills too, you can do competitions that prompt you like on different topics. And so that's also fun.
Do they still publish, there used to be a magazine called Stone Soup, and that was for children's writings. And I think it was totally written by children.
It sounds
And I
really-
don't know if they still publish that or not, but you could check, maybe Google it. It was called Stone Soup. That'd be great.
Yeah.
It's also local, we don't have one, but local libraries that have writing clubs. And you just like workshop whatever you're working on in each different session.
Mhm. Yeah, we've done like a writing your memoirs.
Yeah.
Classes, but that's not necessarily writing fiction. It would be more like auto fiction. I'm trying to think of other.
I know that before COVID, we had like a local authors weekend or week with tons of programming. Because didn't Bianca do that?
Yeah, Bianca did like a local author program here and had a whole bunch of local authors come, but that got passed to me. And I don't do it. I do local authors come in and I do one-offs. Local authors come in and do presentations and talks and stuff.
And you have one of those coming up soon.
I
Or did
just
it just
had
have
one
one?
at the beginning of September, but I'm working on getting a couple others lined
Yeah.
up.
So you could, that might also be a good spot to come and ask like local authors and see what their process is.
Yeah, and depending on what you like to write, there's a lot of different resources available. Like we have books here and resources online about where you can go to get your stuff published. And I know, like, so one of the vendors we use to buy our stuff is called Ingram iPage, the same name, but they have a self-publishing tool called Ingram Spark. And they help you get your books published and printed. But it's through that, and then that'll get it out to like bookstores and booksellers. And then if you're writing like short stories, or if you're writing anything with multiple chapters, Kindle has something called Kindle Vella, Vella, where a chapter, you can post a chapter of what you're writing and it gets released every week. It's kind of similar to Wattpad, if you know what Wattpad is, where you like a chapter of what you published or what you've written gets released every week.
You can be like Charles Dickens, because his books were published in serial form, so it was like a weekly edition or chapter of his book. So that'd be kind of cool. So you could go back to Victorian time and publish your books that.
I read that people in New York would go to the harbor and wait for the newest edition. to come,
I'm
you
sure they
know.
were very popular.
I have another question. How short or how long is a short story?
It depends.
Yeah.
I would say,
I'm not sure what
I
kind of.
don't think there's a strict definition. I would say maybe like no more than like 30 to 50 pages are like super long short stories, but like
So I probably if you want to sit down and
probably like 10 to 30 is a average
Yeah, I
short
think so.
story, depending on who's writing it.
yeah.
I'm trying to think.
This definition says a book that can typically be read in one sitting. Oh, I finished entire books in one sitting.
That's how many hours? Define a city.
1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours.
Reading for minutes per page.
It just says prose shorter than a novel. Self-contained incident or series of linked incidents with only a few characters. That's very vague and not helpful.
I'm trying to think of any like good.
Generally falls between 3,000 and 7,000 words,
Okay.
if you trust this blog.
And don't they say a page is usually 250 words?
Sure.
I think
Depends on
that's,
what type you use.
that's true.
Or if you put any illustrations on it.
Yeah.
So that falls within the short story.
And that's like before it's the edit.
Yeah, that's true. So you could have a really long short story and then edit it down to
Or make it into a series.
or make it into a series.
That's how Lord of the Rings. Jenny started with one book about Patrick Henry, and she's now working on the third one. And it may be as many as 5. Just the more she researched, the more she wanted to include different things and different aspects that don't usually get published about the Revolutionary War. So she also uses her characters to explain how things happen. Because we know when Patrick Henry did his "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, at the end, he says, "Give me liberty or give me death." And he stabbed himself with a letter opener. Well, 18th century letter openers, not sharp, they were used to wax seals. We have no idea why he had that in his hand. And so there's no way that we could factually say, yeah, he carried it around in his pocket all the time. So she had Liz bring the letter opener and drop it in his coat pocket for the book. You know, it got it there. We knew it happened, but how it happened, we didn't know. She also put words into Patrick Henry's mouth because we have he wrote very little. Like Washington and Jefferson researched just about anything on those two because they kept lots of journals and records and stuff. Patrick Henry did. We also know he was a musician and he wrote music. Has anybody ever heard Patrick Henry's music? Guess what? You never will. He thought it was frivolous. He did not want to be known for it, so he burned it. He would teach his kids, some of his kids would do it. Yeah. He was the most proud of the 7 resolutions against the Stamp Act. He actually left a copy of that with his will. Most of his writings were letters to other people or business things. So it's really hard to know a lot about him as a person, and we know nothing about him. But she started the book as a child. So she based it on what we do know and created some dialogue for him that way. The other, talking about places to write, she did go to a lot of places, but she has this as her space. I'll pass it around. Well, if you look at this, I can name half those books up there. But right here on this side, she found this. It was actually designed by Thomas Jefferson. And so she had somebody make one for her. And it holds 6 books, and it's on like a lazy Susan. So she can have 6 books open to be looking and checking facts and stuff. But I thought that was the coolest thing. And I'll pass this around because that you can't see that very well, but it's this right here.
Thank you for your time. We have an activity to get to, so
Okay,
I'm sorry, but we
that's
gotta
okay.
get to the.
I've already talked to you about that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, pick up that- you guys got a calendar open?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, come back.
Like so
Thank you guys. Have a
experienced, you know,
great
this writing books.
Have fun
together.
at dance.
Well, you know, it's interesting how you mentioned the weather and, you know,
Yeah.
the weather. I mean, there are so many things. For example, now there was this, I don't know if you've heard
Oh,
of the
yeah.
series of books. It was called, Ted Rowe, I think wrote it. It's something about, they based it on the characters of Laura Ingalls Wilder and it was set in 1904. And they were giving the Pledge of Allegiance and they said under God. And my mother was very indignant. She said, they didn't say that in 1904. He needs to do his research. And I said, well, you know, he probably didn't think he need, you know, the pledge was the pledge.
Right.
And so it just goes to show you, you know, you don't know what you don't know. you
Right.
know?
Well, and see, that's why Dan, he knew nothing about the 18th century. He knew that he, you know, his family was there and he had this idea of writing the book. And most of the characters are historical. He made up some, to give it a story effect. But when I was reading things, he had a hard time. At first, he would write it like they were dialoguing and for like 2 sentences. And then he'd drop into, he said, she said, he said. I said, no, you got him in the middle of a little argument. Don't do that. You lose your audience. And so he went back to do it. And he changed the name of a character from Ben to Nathaniel with the nickname Nate. But the first 3 chapters he'd used Ben. And then, and when he sent the final copy, I caught it. I said, I thought you changed Ben to Nate. I did. I said, well, your first 3 chapters still have him as Ben. He goes, oh my gosh, and went back. Little things like what you were talking about. He had the characters going to church and coming back in the spring, and the tulips and daffodils were blooming along the road. Not in the 18th century. They're not native to this country. They would have only been found in gardens. But I didn't just leave him out there. I researched Maryland native plants and found him something that he could have growing alongside. You know, so that's kind of what, and that was his first book. So it was a lot of that. And like I said about the clothes, he put her in a white blouse, blue skirt, a red cape, and an apron with a pocket. The ladies in the 18th century wore their pockets under their petticoats. Anything skirt was petticoats. And she would not have worn anything white on top because that was all underwear. And so it would have been short gown, petticoat, red cape. and pockets inside. She may have had an apron on, but it wouldn't have a pocket. I said, you can put that letter in the other pocket. So, it was just little things like that, and menus, what they would have eaten, the time period, during how far west they were, whether they were in the city, stuff like that. Just stuff that I'd been doing for a lot of years.
Have you ever read the children's books, George Washington's Breakfast, or it's something like that? And this boy wants to find out what George Washington ate for breakfast, and it's kind of the research of how you find out what George Washington ate for breakfast.
I've also read George Washington's Teeth and
Oh,
Buttons for Washington.
yes, I know Buttons for Washington. I think I've read George Washington's Teeth too.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of Patrick Henry, I have this very, very vague memory of reading two people, they're famous people, but I can't remember who they were, and they didn't like Patrick Henry. And they said to each other, we must pray for his early death. Do you know who might not have liked Patrick Henry?
Well, Patrick Henry had a way of being very honest. He was very much for the common man. And I do know that, but I can't remember who it is.
Yeah, I just remember, and I
Sounds like
thought
he
it was
might have irritated a
interesting.
lot of people.
Jefferson was one of them. And this is kind of off subject. I mean, Patrick Henry was 7 years older than Jefferson.
Oh,
And when Patrick Henry was in the House of Burgesses, Jefferson was at the College of William and Mary, which was like just blocks away from the building. And he overheard his speech about the resolutions and how to get we shouldn't do them and all this kind of stuff. And that's where he said, if this be treason, make the most of it. Well, Jefferson thought he was wonderful. They met at a Christmas party close, because they all lived fairly close at that time, at the Dandridge's house, and admired him. Well, Patrick Henry went on and he was governor, first elected governor. He was governor 5 times. And then Jefferson got to be governor. And it was right in the heart of the Revolutionary War. And Tarleton and Cornwallis were all heading for Virginia and to Yorktown. And they were after him. So he ran to Monticello. And supposedly, nobody's shown anything for us historians to prove that he actually said anything or made that. But he made a comment that he thought Jefferson should have stayed and made sure his people were all right before he went scurrying off to his home and hiding. And supposedly that's what turned him against him. The first biographer of Patrick Henry wrote it 10 years after he was deceased. And so he went around to all the people that knew him and stuff and tried to get information. And at that time, Jefferson couldn't say anything nice about him. But it's like I like to tell people is they were all just people. They did what they needed to do to get things done. And Patrick Henry was very much a man of the people. He didn't have any problem dissing the king, talking out, speaking up for people. And he really insisted, like when they tried to ratify the Constitution of Virginia, it should have been just a read through and yay or nay on things. It took over 8 days. And basically because he wouldn't sit down and shut up. But he wanted the Bill of Rights connected to the Constitution right from the start. And they were trying to get rid of our control of the Mississippi River, which if y'all don't know, our back door at that time was this state. And we were on the Mississippi. And part of the Revolution War was because Britons wouldn't let us move west anymore. We had all this land we could get there, and then they were going to give away the Mississippi, the control of the Mississippi to Spain. So he goes, this is just not right. But once it was passed, some people said, well, what are you going to do now? He says, I'm going to live by the Constitution. So yeah, there were people that didn't agree with him. And he was very anti-federalist. But, they were all people. They didn't have to like each other. And some of them didn't.
That's what I thought was so interesting is, you read about all these different people, then you find out, well, yeah, they knew each other and they had, and then I thought, oh. Have you read any of the young adult novels by Ann Reid? I think she did one on Patrick Henry, and I know she did one on Thomas Jefferson. I think she mentioned the.
She did one, and it was talking about his first wife. She
But
did,
have you read the books? Do you think they're accurate?
I know that one isn't, because there's no evidence that she ever tried to drop the baby down the well. And he was very much, her first marriage was a love match. Dorothea Dandridge was a kind of a, yeah, her dad, he was 20 years her senior. And so she was in love with John Paul Jones, his son John, Patrick Henry's son, or Patrick Henry the governor. And her dad said, take the governor. So yeah.
But it's been a long time since I read that book, but
Yeah.
I've read a lot of her books. And I
I-
think
that-
she
I-
might have had one with Thomas Jefferson, and
Maybe.
I know I've read about that fleeing thing. But she wrote one that was really good about the people who started Mount Vernon. But then I found out afterward, I mean, it was so good, but then you found out, well, it's really very, I talked to somebody who's a former museum director, and she said, well, no, that's not.
Yeah, I don't think she was completely accurate. There's several writers who picked up the idea and didn't do other. There's one called Suzanne's Midnight Ride, and it's about a young girl who warned Lafayette about the British coming. And they said she called her, well, she was a bowling, and bowlings are connected to Pocahontas, but she said Pocahontas was her grandmother. Just the time frame in that would have been ridiculously off. Maybe her great grandmother. But Pocahontas only had one son. The one son had one daughter. So they have what they call the red, white, and blue bowlings. The reds are proven direct descendants of Pocahontas. The whites are kind of laterally controlled, and the blues are the ones that come right out of the blue and say, yeah, my name's Bowling, I'm a direct descendant of Pocahontas. So, but yeah, so, and she said, what was it, the flower? She said the dogwoods and azaleas or something had this great fragrance, and neither one of them have a fragrance. Yeah, so it's just little things like that, like you said, not thinking about what she's saying. It's a flower, it smells good, but some of us are.
Don't stop and smell the dogwoods. Well, there's somebody said she was reading a manuscript, somebody had written about the Titanic. And when the survivors landed in New York, the TV crew came.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to get yourself out of the century you're in and take it back to.
And Abraham Lincoln got a phone call in one book.
Maybe it was supposed to be that way or something.
Would y'all like to go back and look at the mini museums?
Thank you, Anne.
You're welcome.